listening to One, a podcast about education, teaching, and learning.
Lord, you have begot me, bred me, loved me. I return those duties back as a right fit. Obey you, love you, and most honor you. Why have my sisters husbands if they say they love you all? Happily when I shall wed that lord whose hand must take my plight shall carry half my love with him, half my care and duty. Sure I shall never marry.
I trust I may have leave to speak, and speak I will. I am no child, no babe. Your betters have endured me say my mind, and if you cannot, best you stop your ears. My tongue will tell the anger of my heart, or else my heart concealing it will break, and rather than it shall, I will be free, even to the uttermost, as I please in
damned
words.
spot, out, I say. 1, 2, why then 'tis time to do it. Hell is murky. Fie, my lord, fie, a soldier and a feared. What need we fear who knows it, when none can call our power to account? Yet who would have thought the old man to have so much blood in him?
I should not need if you were gentle, Brutus. Within the bond of marriage, tell me, Brutus, it is expected. I should know no secrets that pertain to you. Am I yourself, but as it were, in sort or limitation, to keep with you at meals, comfort your bed, and talk to you sometimes? Dwell I but in the suburbs of your good pleasure. If it be no more, Portia is Brutus's harlot,
If you prick us, do
not
we
his
not
wife.
bleed? If you tickle us, do we not laugh? If you poison us, do we not die? And if you wrong us, shall we not revenge? If we are like you in the rest, we will resemble you in that. If a Jew wrong a Christian, what is his humility? Revenge. If a Christian wrong a Jew, what should his sufferance be by Christian example? Why, revenge. The villainy you teach me I will execute, and it shall go hard, but I will better the
Be patient
instruction.
till the last. Romans, countrymen, and lovers, hear me for my cause, and be silent that you might hear. Believe me for mine honor, and have respect to mine honor, that you may believe. Censure me in your wisdom, and awake your senses, that you may the better judge. If there be any in this assembly, any dear friend of Caesar's, to him I say that Brutus's love to Caesar was no less than his. If then that friend demand why Brutus rose against Caesar, this is my answer. Not that I love Caesar less, but that I loved Rome more.
Troilus had his brains dashed out with a Grecian club, yet he did what he could to die before, and he is one of the patterns of love. Leander, he would have lived many a fair year, though Hero had turned none, if it had not been for a hot midsummer night, for, good youth, he went but forth to wash him in the Hellespont, and being taken with the cramp was drowned. And the foolish chroniclers of that age found it was Hero of Sestos. But these are all lies. Men have died from time to time, and worms have eaten them, but not for love.
Friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears. I come to bury Caesar, not to praise him. The evil that men do lives after them. The good is often tarried with their bones. So let it be with Caesar. The noble Brutus hath told you Caesar was ambitious. If it were so, it was a grievous fault, and grievously hath Caesar answered it. Here, under leave of Brutus and the rest, for Brutus is an honorable man, so are they all honorable men, come I to speak in Caesar's funeral.
Hi there.
Hey,
Hey,
welcome
welcome.
to this version of the quarantine.
Yeah, the quarantine episode, quarantine edition of our podcast.
Very special.
We're drinking this week to get through aspects of the quarantine. What are we drinking?
We are drinking margaritas because we actually, just for the first time, picked up margaritas from one of our favorite Mexican restaurants.
Yeah.
In the to-go fashion.
This is a new thing that's happening because of the coronavirus. Ohio just passed a provisional law that allows places that have liquor licenses to sort of just temporarily sell takeout to-go beverages of an alcoholic nature.
Yeah, so they're like mixed drinks to go.
So we're enjoying the bounty of that temporary
and we're supporting
law.
local.
Yes, we want to support our local businesses during this time. So that's what we're doing. We're trying really hard. Yeah, just a quick note. All the episodes that you've heard up to now are recorded before some of the serious lockdowns and such took place. We're in like week maybe 4 of self-quarantining here in Ohio. So our governor is a little more aggressive than most about the quarantine procedure. So we have been kind of locked in our house for probably a solid 4 weeks now. So we hope you're all staying relatively happy and healthy out there. We know some people have been affected by this pretty seriously, so we would just want to caution you to stay inside and ride this out with us, and whenever possible, support local small businesses.
I saw a post on one of the teacher groups I'm in on Facebook that was like, this is what every group project feels like. Like, some of us are doing the right thing, and we have been quarantining, which you and I have been, like, pretty seriously since then. And then, you know, there's just like that one or two in the group who don't do what they should be doing. They're going to ruin it for the rest of us.
Yeah.
And we're not going to get baseball season until who knows when. So,
yeah, I think the main issue is just like, you know, if we do some of these restrictive things now pretty aggressively, we won't have to keep dragging out this quarantine for the rest of our existences here on this earth.
That's the hope.
So, wash your hands, stay inside, help your elderly neighbors and friends.
Yeah.
However you can. Anyway, so yeah, first quarantine edition of the podcast. We're going to talk about something that is kind of just fun for both of us to try to get our minds off of all of the more depressing parts of existing in this COVID-19 era. We are going to talk about today teaching Shakespeare.
Billy Shakes.
William Shacklespar. Bill Shakespeare.
Bill. My kids like to call him Billy Shakes.
Willie.
Big Willie style.
Big Willie style.
Well, Shakespeare's something we both love, but we love differently, I guess is how I would describe it.
I would say so, just based on our favorite Shakespeare plays.
We don't overlap anywhere.
We're very different in that. What's your favorite play?
I think it has to be Caesar.
Isn't that weird, guys?
But my love is like Taming of the Shrew, so I'm kind of in a tough spot.
Okay.
I've read Caesar more than I've read any other, because I've read Caesar, I don't know, 50 times. Just teaching it, not including, you know, any time
have you read it that many times because you teach it? Is that why?
Because I've taught it every single year to at least 3 periods a day for 7 years.
Yeah, I have no such attachment to any particular play, which is why
I really like Othello. That's probably one I should have mentioned. I really like Othello.
I do really enjoy Othello. That is for sure. That's a good one. Some of my favorites are ones that I was reading from at the beginning of the episode there. My favorites tend to be Lear.
Yours are canoned, I would say.
I really like King Lear. I really like Macbeth even better than Hamlet, which everyone always gets mad at me for because they're like, no, Hamlet is the best. And I'm like,
I like Macbeth better than Hamlet.
I do too. And I will say that I'm sure there are measures by which you could say Hamlet is a superior play, but for me, for whatever reason, the tragedy that really resonates, the murdery, conniving tragedy anyway, is Macbeth. Lear is also a tragedy, but it's more about family struggles, I guess. I don't know. I also really like Merchant of Venice, and I adore Rosalind and As You Like It, so that's another one of my favorites. So
I do love Lear. I'm just kind of thinking about it now that you're talking about it. But we've just like recently kind of gotten back into Lear though, also.
Yeah, it's always been one of my favorites, but we did watch the Anthony Hopkins version recently.
We have the Dresser to watch, which we haven't watched yet, but you've seen.
Right.
But I haven't. So we've got that on our list for the quarantine.
Yep.
Well, why don't you tell me about like, when did you start? Like what was your introduction? Like, what was it like? What's it feel like?
Yeah, I can remember as far back as early middle school at some point, reading probably abridged versions of, I think we might have actually read Lear in like sixth grade or something.
That is not appropriate.
Yeah, I know, it was great. It was a somewhat abridged version, so it wasn't
somewhat abridged.
That I can't.
What do you leave out?
I honestly can't remember, but I do remember discussing sibling rivalries and how they can be weird and stuff like that. So, you know, there's a way into it for young people.
No, I know. I'm not trying to be dismissive. I just mean.
But I'm pretty sure that was sixth grade-ish. That might have been Lear. And that might have been the first thing I remember. I mean, my parents are very theatery people, so we had it around and in the
you
house
definitely
before
had
then.
an earlier exposure than I did.
Right. But that's in middle school we read that, and I think in high school probably every single year in high school we read at least one Shakespeare play, sometimes more than
I
that.
only read one in high school.
Oh,
That's it.
What was the one you read?
What do you think? What's everybody reading in high school?
Romeo and Juliet. I skipped that in high school, thankfully, because it's one of my least favorite plays.
Yeah.
It
we
is
read
one of
it. That and the only thing I really remember, I won't go too far into this, is the Call of the Wild. That also stuck out to me as a ninth grade text.
Jack London, folks.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing like William Shakespeare, but here we go.
Those two things stick out about ninth grade English, though. Is
Okay,
what I mostly
see.
meant. Sorry.
I remember in ninth grade, we read The Tempest, because I remember very distinctly some 10th graders in that class acting out parts of Caliban, and it was pretty funny. But that happened in ninth grade. 10th grade, I guess, was Caesar,
Probably
right?
Caesar.
It was Caesar.
It's pretty stereotypically 10th grade.
Yeah. And then after that, when things happened, it was kind of all a blur. We read Hamlet, we read Macbeth.
Mm-hmm. Did you read Lear?
I don't think we did in high school, but I might be wrong about that.
Sure.
Because I feel as though I would have loved it a lot if I had read it in high school. One thing that we've talked about on the show before is that Shakespeare is the only actually prescribed author in the Common Core standards for English.
Spelled out.
It's the only one that the Common Core says, hey, you need to teach this author. The rest of it is completely left up to teachers, the authors that they teach.
I don't
to
disagree
fulfill.
with that either. Like, let me just be clear. Like, I'm gonna hop on my English, soapbox, but I agree with that.
Yeah. It's the only one. So whoever decided to write the Common Core ELA standards was like, you know what? The one thing that we have to have in here that we make sure everyone knows is Shakespeare.
Yeah.
Kind of alongside of that, we've talked about this before, but it felt a little weird to read Shakespeare as a high schooler, and I'm sure that I would never. I would have been too proud to admit this at the time, right? But it's so hard.
It's hard as an adult.
It's so hard.
I struggled with Shakespeare in my master's.
Right? Yeah, me too. I
like, it's not easy stuff. It's not a one read kind of event. You know what I mean? Like, when you talk about literature, like, Shakespeare isn't something you read once and you're like, I understand. Like, you don't. Like, if you say you are, then, like, good for you, but I don't believe you.
And you really only have the chance to read it the one time in high school, and you gotta cram a whole lot of other things in, so you don't necessarily take the time with it that it probably deserves. But it is really hard. And like I said, in high school, I would never have said this or admitted it or even necessarily been aware of it, but I didn't know what the heck I was reading.
Oh, God, no.
I tried really hard. But it is difficult. And even in college, I was like, wow. The experience of reading in college was so much different, and even in many, many ways much better than reading it in high school, because I finally understood, even just kind of on the basic language, like vocabulary level, what I was encountering in a way that I didn't in high school. But even then, it's still just like every time I read a play, my mind is blown all over again by the density and complexity of the language. And so it's, you and I have talked about this separately, but a real issue for me with reading Shakespeare is it seems like there's a point that you have to get to where you just kind of understand what is being said before you can even begin to ponder big questions about the text. You just have to understand what they're saying before you can even think about what
I always tell my
saying.
kids when we do Caesar, because I teach Caesar to my 10th graders, I always tell them that, like, we kind of have to do this in a couple of ways. Like, we're in some ways, we're reading a different language. Like how you and I speak and how my 10th graders speak and how William Shakespeare writes, are not the same thing. So we have to treat it as a text in general that we sort of have to decipher and to, pull out vocab and things like that. Like, it's not so simple as just, a lot of other texts. Like, if your vocabulary isn't there, you're not going to understand Shakespeare quickly or easily. And that's what I think is so difficult about him on my end, is in the teaching of it. That's where I have the hardest time. And that's why it takes me the longest to teach Caesar. I mean, I take a whole 9 weeks to teach Caesar. Just because it takes so much effort to get us through it.
Why don't you talk a little bit about how you go about teaching, I guess, Caesar and other Shakespeare? Just kind of outline your general process for that. And the age group of your kids are mostly,
Sure.
this is mostly 10th graders,
Yeah,
right?
so I only ever taught Taming of the Shrew 1 year. It was my very first year of teaching. It was the 12th graders. And the reason that I chose it, not only because I had a classroom set, but my bachelor's thesis was in Taming of the Shrew. So it's a play that I know and that I love, and I felt really confident as a first-year teacher to tackle. During my student teaching, I actually got the chance to co-teach Caesar, and that was my first experience with it. I had never read it. I didn't read it in my undergrad. I didn't read it in high school, but I read it with my co-teacher who was incredible, and I loved Caesar. And my textbook that I still have is the same one I student taught with, and it's the same one I had in high school actually as a 10th grader. Caesar was in it, and I was like, okay, let's do this. Like, I'm fresh and comfortable with it. What I have found in teaching Caesar is that we almost have to put it into the terms that, I don't want to say they strip the meaning of it, but that they definitely aren't hinting at the seriousness of it. But like with Caesar, I can hint at, or I can touch on these things of like envy and things like that, and what it feels like when you don't trust your friends, and what it feels like when you trust someone and they hurt you. And so, not that that's what I can boil Caesar down to, but that if you can put them in terms of a teenage relationship and their understanding of like friendship, then we can start to kind of identify like the struggle between Cassius and Brutus and Caesar and Mark Antony, and to say like, who is this in this friend group? Who is this in this friend group? We don't like, name names, but it's the most manageable way that I've found to get kids to digest Caesar. And then from there, once I've gotten kind of that kind of thing out of the way, like once we're able to say like, hey, we're dealing with backstabbing, literally, figuratively, we're dealing with, these complex things, then I can build on it. But until I've got that stuff kind of laid out, I can't do much with it.
I mean, I think it's kind of interesting that you lay it out that way, because my experience in teaching Shakespeare is a little less formal than yours, but I've run seminars with high school students, with college students, and then with adults, a kind of mix of business leader type people and then like retired adults, or all kinds of different scenarios where I've led seminars on Caesar. And on Shakespeare, led seminars on Shakespeare. And I've found that the way into it for all of those groups is very similar to what you just described. You have to, because
we're humans,
right?
It's our language.
Well, it's because the vocabulary is so foreign. You have to help them understand why the thing they're reading is indeed very revealing in terms of the way they live their lives. You have to guide people from, this is archaic language that I don't understand, to, oh, I've actually lived through this kind of experience, and this is why it's important to think about. You gotta kind of start from a point of inviting them into the conflicts of the story that they can't instantly see themselves.
Sure.
So teaching Shakespeare is really about kind of guiding somebody from point A, which is total confusion about the language they're experiencing, to, point whatever, where they've related to the story on a very human level. But
like anyone can identify with the themes of Caesar. And so I think in my limited teaching of other Shakespeare, I would assume, like I actually thought this year I might teach King Lear to my 12th graders, and then we were taken out of school, and I don't really feel like I can tackle Lear from a distance as well as I could have, on a day-to-day basis, but that's where you have to start. And so I think that's what sometimes people kind of, I don't know if it's a misunderstanding or if it's an intimidation factor, but people are afraid of Shakespeare. And I don't know if it's because it hasn't been broken down into these like, really digestible ideas, or if it's just because of the language barrier itself. But as soon as you start talking to kids, especially teenagers, has your best friend ever done something? Like, they're like, let me tell you about so-and-so on Instagram, like whatever. So it's like, it's really quick and they feel it. And also, I could get on my Caesar soapbox forever, but it's sarcastic. And teenagers like sarcasm.
The wit. Yeah.
Yeah. And so like they pick up on that like quicker than I sometimes give them credit.
I think another thing that is a bit of a roadblock with Shakespeare is that Shakespeare, the man, the myth, is so monolithic that people kind of write it off as something that almost is kind of trite in some weird shared cultural understanding way. They're like, oh yeah, Shakespeare, okay, great playwright, blah blah blah. And this is actually especially, I think this is more acute with adult learners that I've taught with these plays. They think they know things because everybody knows about Shakespeare, right? Like everyone's heard the name Shakespeare, so it's really difficult to kind of break down preconceptions about texts like that when people think they are already experts on it because they have, read Romeo and Juliet in high school or whatever it is. It's really difficult to...
I'm not an expert, let me be honest.
Well, no, I don't. It's very difficult
I should be open with everyone listening. I'm not an expert, but I do love him.
I mean, I just think that is a challenge that, and again, I've noticed it more acutely with adult learners because adult learners feel like they have, especially in seminar type environments, which is kind of my specialty, adult learners feel like they have more to lose because they don't want to be the ones who don't know something. And especially with Shakespeare, who everyone feels like they're supposed to know because it's Shakespeare.
Isn't that weird?
You got to break down barriers more aggressively and more quickly with adult learners because you don't want to preempt learning that could happen because people think they know things already. So it's and again, that's not to say that when I come in, I as a facilitator think that I'm the one who does know things. It's not that at all. It's just that we've got to get out of the way really quickly this notion that any of us know things, and we kind of start from a bit of a blank slate and move forward from there, and it makes it much more constructive when people aren't bringing what they think is their kind of their little small town expertise to the big kids table to show it off. So it's a hard one to overcome, and I can imagine it kind of happening in a similar way, but probably more understated in high school. Just that, like, oh yeah, okay, well, yeah, it's Shakespeare. He's a famous guy, blah, blah.
Yeah. Yes and no, maybe. I've definitely had some kids who come in and been like, oh, I read Hamlet by myself. I'm like, okay, what's it about? And to be fair, if I was a ninth grader, reading Hamlet, I wouldn't have gotten the things that,
Right.
And
that's the thing you say to try to prove your worth.
It is.
Right?
And so that's fine. And today, I came into this episode knowing Chelsea was going to talk way more about this kind of stuff than I am, because your love of Shakespeare is greater than mine, even. So you're like the resident Shakespeare expert at the table right now, which I love because I'm just going to sit here and enjoy this margarita. But I think if anyone wants to tackle Shakespeare, right, like even adults who may be in quarantine are like, man, what else can I do? I have finished Joe Exotic's Netflix special. If you can just break it down into like these, and I don't want to keep using themes, but like that's what they are. Like, it's humanity, like all of these stories of his, right? Like we can boil them down to sisters or relationships or things like that. So
yeah, I do want to add that I think that maybe as you become more familiar either as a student of or a teacher of Shakespeare, it kind of circles back around to where you started. So you start in a point of confusion because of the language, and then you reach out into these deep themes that you're talking about, and then I think after you've reached out and sort of connected with some of those themes, then you can circle back to the language that caused you confusion in the beginning, and you can really enjoy it on a totally different level. Once you understand the basics of what even is going on, and how you can, as a contemporary learner, how you can process, what's going on, then you have what I think is a really cool opportunity to go back and enjoy the language for the language's sake,
which is completely different,
which you can't do at the beginning, which maybe is where some people stumble a little bit in either teaching or learning Shakespeare, is that the assumption that you can just relish in this language immediately, and it's not. Well, in high school that was kind of expected me a little bit, like of me, like, oh, look at this beautifully written thing, this sonnet, this monologue, this whatever it was that Shakespeare wrote, and it's just like, I'm like, I don't even know what he's saying. I'll pretend like it's really meaningful and beautiful, but you gotta do a lot of work that sometimes requires you to just live life first.
Well, and
you gotta
also
maybe experience love or loss or profound sadness before you can tap into a lot of these things. So it's difficult to ask that of young people.
Well,
especially.
The thing though that I don't think we haven't brought it up yet, but is really, really important, is that we're also talking about a history in a lot of his plays, right? Like Caesar historically. Like I don't even touch with my kids like the history of the things surrounding Caesar, except for like a quick 15-minute intro video that just kind of sets the scene for, you know, Pompey and like Caesar and like the warring and, you know, that kind of stuff. So that's the other thing that separates people from it, is not only is it this language we don't know, but many people aren't familiar with that history.
Yeah.
You know, I love history, and that's not a part of history that I'm like eager to read about.
And with Shakespeare, it's actually a two-toned problem, because often his plays are sort of weird mirrors into the parallel universe of his current political climate. So,
Sure.
So he's writing a play about, you know, Caesar and Pompey and Rome or whatever, but it's actually maybe sometimes a commentary.
Yeah, I mean, he's doing the same thing as
the
Arthur
state
Miller
of
with the
things.
Crucible and the Salem Witch Trials.
Right, right. So
It's a
he's,
story of the Red Scare, but it's set in Salem.
yeah, so he's making a commentary on a modern political moment, modern to him. And so
And us today are like,
yeah, you gotta put through the filter of like, we read Troilus and Cressida in college, and it was like, it's about ancient Greece, and he's making jokes about books that weren't written until a couple hundred years after it, and like by, I think it's either Plato or Aristotle, I forget. One of the people in Troilus and Cressida is reading one of those philosophers who didn't come until hundreds of years after the time of the play, and you would have no idea.
Oh, he does that with clocks as well in Caesar.
Clocks in Caesar,
he does it.
Clocks did not exist.
Sorry, I was having a hard time. Yeah, he does that a few.
These weird anachronisms.
Yeah,
So
he
it's
does
just
that a lot.
he puts things that don't belong in the historical periods where they are, and then he also is using historical periods to make commentary on present day England or whatever it is. And it's just you can't begin to tap into all of those layers of this stuff unless you're pursuing like doctoral work in Shakespeare. It's just the stuff that you unlock. But I mean, again, the stuff that you unlock as you return to these plays over time, which I'd highly recommend that people do if they're able to, is just like, you know what, it might have seemed really weird and foreign and boring in high school, but maybe go back to it now and it'll seem probably really different for most.
Or find a great
readers.
version to watch, which is what I recommend.
Yeah. This is kind of another one of the questions that we have, is like the best way to, especially for kind of middle school and high school, mostly high school and or maybe even college age groups, like what's the best way to have them encounter a text that is primarily that was meant to be performed. It's kind of like taking a picture instead of a video of something, you know. It's like that's what it's like to read a play, read a text that was meant to be performed. I struggle with thinking about how to best first present a text that is not familiar to most people when that text is a play. It's like, should we show them a performative interpretation of this? Should we just have them read it first? You brought up a concern with showing performances
I don't
first.
In all of the plays, dramas that I teach, I show them after. I don't show them anything before because I want them to come into it with a clean slate. But high schoolers also, if they can watch the movie, they're going to go watch the movie and not do any of the reading. So if I do that first, I've already lost them to get any sort of deeper, you know, more relevant discussion out of it. In my experience, that isn't to say it can't be done, but in my teaching career, that has not been the best practice for me and my kids. So I haven't done it. But I think
to me that's a big bummer to me, because I would love to be able to show people a performance first and then have them do a deep dive into the text afterwards. But like you're saying,
but
experience shows that
what you want to happen though is a higher level of thinking than most 10th graders are eager to perform, I suppose I should say. But we're also talking about Shakespeare is not something that a 10th grader gets excited to read. So if I have forced them through 3 days, let's call it, of who knows what version of Caesar I could find, I'm probably not going to keep them, you know, their attention very long, because they're going to be like, oh yeah, and then he dies, and like that's going to be it. Like, we're talking about different kinds of learners here. Like me and you, like if we went into learning a new Shakespeare or whatever, repeating Shakespeare or something, that would do something for us. But like, not all of my 10th graders are capable of that type of learning, I guess is what I would say. And that's where I find the disconnect to be.
Yeah.
That isn't to say that's not a great way to teach it. In my experience with college prep, not the best move for me personally.
What wasn't the best move?
To have them watch it first and then read it out loud.
Got you.
Because I read Shakespeare aloud with him. Like Caesar, I do every single day in my class. We read aloud, we take parts. Like it's a very involved experience.
Mm-hmm.
I don't do all literature that way, but I do, Caesar that way. So
yeah, I think I totally understand the concern, and I can totally see where if a high schooler thinks they've processed the text because they've seen it in a performance, a taped performance, then they think they're done and they don't need to do further work on it, especially without much extrinsic motivation to do a deep dive. I think it's difficult to motivate people. I do feel though that there's something that's lost that can only be gained when you see a performance of Shakespeare.
Mm-hmm.
But
a
the
good performance of Shakespeare.
I was just gonna say
you're being too broad again.
No. The concern that I do have with my take that it might be nice to show performances first is that it is easy to find bad performances of Shakespeare. I've seen.
I would say there might be more of those than good.
Yes. Oh, I'm sure. Statistically, there are probably way more bad performances of Shakespeare than good.
I'm having a hard time recalling a lot of good ones now.
But the other thing is that even if it's a good performance of Shakespeare, it might be a good performance of Shakespeare that interprets a particular character in a really particular way that you don't necessarily want somebody. I mean, the example that I always think of is Shylock in Merchant of Venice, and a lot of performances of Shakespeare have him as this crazy ranting man who it's difficult to be sympathetic with. He's demanding his pound of flesh and a sort of retribution for a wrong that was done to him, and he's just in many performances of Merchant of Venice, he's just this ranting, angry guy that you can kind of write off. But when I saw a performance of Merchant where Shylock was portrayed as being sympathetic, and that particular performance of that character is kind of the only way that I can read that play now and process it. I can't interpret Shylock any other way, which in a way is limiting. If I had never seen that, then maybe I could kind of consider both ways of portraying him. But having seen one that was so seen a performance that was so good and so solidified in a particular interpretation of how to do Shylock, it would be really difficult for me to kind of accept some of these other ways. So I think that that's a hard thing, because even, like I said, even when they're good performances, they might cut off some ways of thinking about plays, especially for younger students. They might, kind of prematurely come to the conclusion that this is the way that it has to be because of a particular performance that they saw, which I think would be too bad. But it's just a lot to ask of anyone on a good day with just one performance. So
I mean, I didn't love Hamlet nearly as much as I love Hamlet now until I saw it done when Hamlet was a female lesbian at Agecroft in Richmond, and it was so cool. Like, it totally changed. You know what I mean? Like, not that that's how it's intended, but that's an example of how these interpretations can and do sometimes shift the like Hamlet. I mean, it's obviously beautiful. I'm stupid if I'm not sitting here gloating about it, but like I'd never had this really strong intention, like or like affection for it. Like, I never gave it that much of my time or attention, and then I was like, oh man, this is such a cool version. Like, I have so much more interest in it now.
yeah.
So, but that's good drama. That's not always the case. That's the problem.
Yep.
So that's, I guess, for me as a teacher, I have a hard time showing them it first. Because
probably more harm than good that can come of that.
Now, like, other students, different classes, probably much different. But for me, my kids, that would be best right now.
How do you generally evaluate kids on their understanding of Shakespeare?
Great question. No, I mean, with Shakespeare, we talk a lot about conflict, obviously. So a lot of the evaluations I do of them is based on their writings about the types of conflicts. So we're talking about like internal, external, like all of that kind of stuff. So when the kids can identify, in my belief of teaching Caesar, if my kids can identify Brutus's inner conflict and like why conspiring against Caesar was hard but the right thing, that tells me a lot about their understanding of it. If they're able to tell me that Mark Antony is sarcastic in the funeral speech, that tells me a lot about their interpretation. You know what I mean? So I do it a lot more in those types of ways than it is like, I don't know. It's more writing based for me. Now that doesn't mean that the test isn't also just like checking to make sure they've been reading and keeping up with me and things like that. But as far as the actual test goes, it's weighted towards the writing portion, and that's based on the conflict. So if you can tell me about the conflicts in Caesar, you understand Caesar. That's all there is to it. Like in my mind, that's the piece.
Yeah, I wonder how your answer might change in like a lighter play, like a comedy or something.
Oh, it'd be totally different.
Yeah, so how might you evaluate a comedy or a problem play or something like that?
Like with Taming of the Shrew, maybe?
Yeah, just something that's not so obviously driven by conflict in that way.
I really base a lot of my evaluations of students based on character development and their understanding of the complexities of characters. And so that's usually kind of what I resort to. Because what I found is that if students can tell me about characters and like what makes them tick and what makes them crazy, and so like Catherine of Manola cannot stand this who will not leave her alone and stop calling her the wrong name, right? Like that's what we're getting at. Like he keeps calling her Kate and she can't stand it. But if my kids can tell me why that bugs her, they understand it. Does that make sense? Like, and I don't want to be so simple. Like I'm not, Caesar isn't, I don't know. But if you can get a teenager to tell me, why does Catherine hate being called Kate so much by this guy she doesn't like at first?
Kiss me, Kate.
Yeah, she doesn't like that. It doesn't go well for Petruchio. That's fine. But that's also how I teach most of my literature. Not just Shakespeare. Because like I said, I mean, and we might have talked about this a little bit, I'm not a good test taker. I've never been a good test taker. Now as an adult, I know that I was probably suffering from some pretty severe test anxiety, but I could have written a lot of things that I couldn't maybe have chosen as a, multiple choice or matching. So I try to give my students a lot of those chances, just as a safety net. But that's also why I focus so much on the characters themselves, because I feel like if you can identify the characters and understand them, you're going to understand it. Like,
yeah. One thing that I've found is a kind of useful tool for evaluating where people are in their understanding of Shakespeare is to have them come up with questions about the text that they think are important to ask. I mean, and usually this is kind of like a essay or writing based exercise, but having them come up with their own questions and then answering them by means of the text, right? But if
I do that, but the kids just ask me for the answer instead.
Well, yeah,
that's high school in a nutshell. Hey, Miss Day, why does
I mean, a lot of the success of that exercise depends on people understanding that there isn't necessarily a right answer, but just you can kind of judge where somebody is in their understanding based on this sort of question that they ask about the text. Yeah. So that's another useful kind of way in terms of evaluation that I've found over the years.
Yeah, and I think this is kind of, I don't know, as an educator I hear this question or this statement all the time, but like they don't know what they don't know, so they don't know what to ask. And that's what I see happening a lot of times with Shakespeare. Is like they don't even know what to start to ask to understand it better because he can be so intimidating. But I like that line of thinking. I could do that with my seniors. The question and them answering it. Like that's definitely something more suited for them, I think.
I mean, I think your ability to ask a good question changes and develops over time. It's not something that comes out of the box, and just like our understandings of Shakespeare evolving over time, and how I felt like I thought I knew some things in high school, but having read it in college, I was like, okay, I was a clueless adult at the time. And, when I read it now, I feel like, why did I think that in college? That was dumb, So it's like, I think you got to kind of take that into any consideration of how to evaluate somebody's understanding of Shakespeare. But I do like peering into somebody's soul by asking them to come up with their own questions that they'd want to pursue about a text or something. So yeah, I just, with more difficult things that have more difficult language, more impenetrable language on first glance, that's always been a useful tool for evaluation for me. So
Sure.
let's talk about some of the resources that we've used over time to help us when we are teaching or reading Shakespeare. Because there are a lot of cool ones out there.
Yeah, there's, oh my gosh, there's so many resources. You could drown in them practically. But for me, and this is true for a lot of things that I teach, I try to give some historical context to whatever we're reading, just to kind of help put the kids wherever we are. I use a lot of John Green and his brother Hank Green, their YouTube channel called Crash Course. And so this is also fun. John Green does an incredible video for the Roman Empire, but also John Green took a quote from Caesar to name probably his most famous book. So that's also one of the reasons I like it so much, is because The Fault in Our Stars, that we are the underlings. So I like Crash Course. I would recommend Crash Course for any type of learning. I use No Fear Shakespeare, which is ran by my student's best friend, Spark Notes. And No Fear Shakespeare is a side-by-side reading. It's free online. You can order the book on Amazon or wherever you buy books. I have a ton of versions of No Fear Shakespeare for all of his works. But like I said, it's side-by-side. And so when we get to the funeral speeches, I read each funeral speech just so they can hear it once all the way through. And then I have them all get on a Chromebook, check out No Fear Shakespeare, and then we read the common day translation of it, just as a way to really, like, those funeral speeches are critical. I try to highlight a lot of the bigger, like Cassius, some of his big things with No Fear Shakespeare.
Yeah, there's something a little bit similar, although a bit more academic-y feeling that I've used in the past, and that's the RSC, the Royal Shakespeare Company's Complete Works of Shakespeare. That's one of the editions of Shakespeare that I have. It's got all the plays and the sonnets too, I think, but it comes with, before every play, there's a short, kind of very short essay on it. Then there's a box that has kind of key facts, and then like the key facts, it talks a bit about just kind of a plot overview, and then it tells you the breakdown of speaking parts, the percentages of speeches, like, so who speaks like 22% or 11% or whatever based on the character. It tells you the linguistic medium of the play, which is kind of interesting, the percentage of verse and prose. It tells you dates of publication sources and kind of stuff about the text, the original text, and so it gives you this high level breakdown. And then the RSC also has notes, sort of vocabulary notes, running along in the footers of each page. So this is more kind of not necessarily for students to share with them, but probably for us as people who are teaching this kind of stuff, just to help us, because we have limited time in the day to go look things up. It's a really useful complete works publication. So if you can get your hands on the RSC one, I'd highly recommend that. It's probably my favorite way to read Shakespeare. And we also both talked about resources from the Folger Library, the Folger Shakespeare Library. They've got a lot of stuff online. A lot of it's free to help in the teaching of Shakespeare. One of the things that we've both talked about too is the Folger Shakespeare Library. They have a lot of interesting resources for teachers online.
Yeah, and especially if you teach English, obviously, this is more for you, but I attended the National Council for the Teachers of English this past November in Baltimore, and they had a table there, and they're super nice people, and they had a lot of really, really great resources that you can find online as well in teaching Shakespeare. And they're eager to have Shakespeare be taught. So I would really recommend their stuff. And they were super fun to talk to.
It's a really cool venue, too. The theater is amazing. Yeah. So I've been lucky enough I saw Othello at the Folger, and it was really great. Really, really cool.
But, place. I mean, to hear them talk, they're very eager to, support teachers in teaching it. So I would, if you're especially at a conference or something like that, and they're there, and especially if you're an English teacher, there are a lot of places. I mean, they really go where we are. So definitely seek them out, because you're going to get a ton of stuff, a ton of ideas, and you're going to have a really nice conversation. So I really recommend Folger.
And then tell me about this pop-up.
My students love this. It was a former teacher who's since retired, one of my mentors. She gave me, when she left teaching, a pop-up book of the Globe Theater, and it's probably like a foot tall when it's open.
Wow.
It is so great, and my kids love it. And I have like a little William Shakespeare figurine, and so like they go together, obviously, but my kids just love it. I'll try to find a link to include to this thing, because it's beautiful.
Yeah, we'll stick it in the show notes if we can find it.
We would be horrible if we didn't include the Globe Theater in this somewhere. So it's a really cool way to honor the theater. And it's really interesting history. And I mean, who doesn't love a pop-up book? It's still one of my favorite things.
Cool. All right, we're at the part of the show where it is time to involve you listeners in our little podcast venture. It's time for the fill in the blank segment. Are you ready for this? I am ready for this one. Yeah, we're pumped. We had a kind of a tie with our last episode. We had 2 listeners write in with the correct answer.
Mm-hmm. 2 of my favorite people.
Yeah. Shout out to our friends who wrote in. We are going to be sending out stickers to both of those people who wrote in. So if you're ready, here comes the next question. All you have to do is write in to hello@16to1.com email address. Just send us an email, or you can find us on anywhere on social media and drop us a line there too. But just write in, tell us the answer to the following question, and we will send you a sticker for the show. What's the question? You want to read it?
What is the name of the acting company to which Shakespeare belonged for most of his life?
The acting company.
Mm-hmm.
What acting company did Shakespeare belong to for most of his life?
Mm-hmm.
All right. That's the fill in the blank for this week. Go ahead and reach out to us on any social platform or email us, and we will send you swag.
We can't wait to share these with everyone, so please email us.
Yep. We have a huge pile of stickers, and we need to get them out into the world.
Okay. What did you learn this week?
What did I learn?
What have you learned since our quarantining?
Yeah.
Quarantining.
Let me just say that we've probably not learned as much as we usually would, because we've had a very limited scope of the world, which is the world inside this house has been the world that we have seen. So we haven't had as many learning opportunities as we normally would, maybe because we are not talking to very many other human beings, and we're not traveling anywhere, and so
we're not.
It's limited. But
we talk to the dog a lot.
So yeah, the dog really appreciates our company.
She's so done with this. The cat's even more done.
Animals are done. Other humans are done. We're all done in this quarantine.
We want to see our friends again.
Yeah. But I did learn something, and that's that this week yet another press secretary resigned or left or was fired or some combination of those things. But
she got a new job.
Yeah, she went back to her old job actually. But
never mind, she got her old job.
She got her old job. But without going too much into the politics of any of that, what I did learn, and I guess I wasn't aware of this because I don't follow it, was that this current press secretary never held a press conference.
It's like in the title.
Basically the job description of the press secretary.
What's she been doing since last summer?
Yeah, last summer she came out like June or July or something. Yeah, we looked it up, but Stephanie Grisham is her name, but she departed the press secretary's office without ever having held a press conference. We're starting to watch Kate and I are watching The West Wing right now. We just started, and CJ is our favorite press secretary of all time, but it kind of makes us lament the days when press secretaries could give coherent press secretary.
You forgot Sean Spicer.
Oh, Sean Spicer. Rip. Dancing with the Stars. Sean Spicer.
What I learned is kind of actually in the same vein a little bit. So, a couple things.
Do tell.
We've been binge watching just like everybody else. I have a couple of recommendations if that's okay. I would like to just throw out if you're looking for something great or okay, whatever. We really like The Life of Madam C.J. Walker, which is on Netflix with Octavia Spencer. Great.
It's called Self-Made, right?
Self-Made, yeah, sorry. Yeah. But it's her the life of Madam C.J. Walker.
Really interesting portrait of a woman I had never heard of.
Yeah.
Who was
she's credited as being the first black millionaire, female millionaire.
Yeah. And
great show.
Really interesting.
Very digestible.
An interesting point in history, an interesting point in business for women.
Yeah.
All
I like
kinds
that.
of stuff going on. It's really short. It's only about 4 episodes.
I think it was 4 or 5, yeah.
4 or 5 episodes, and it's,
less than an hour each.
You can do it in a day.
Yeah, we did it in a day.
Especially
we all do.
in the corona times, you can do it in a day. So
we like that.
Yep.
We liked what we like so far is Little Fires Everywhere, which is on Hulu.
Yeah, that show weirds me out a little bit, but I like it, I think.
And by the time this comes out, there'll be an additional episode, but we like what we've seen so far. It's Kerry Washington, who we love.
From Scandal.
Who we couldn't love more.
An American Son that we saw.
We saw her live on Broadway. Incredible.
We were like 10 rows back from Kerry Washington's Sweat.
It was so close. And Reese Witherspoon, who I love. So anyways, those are 2 good recommendations. But what I learned, one of the first things that we binged was Designated Survivor, which is Kiefer Sutherland playing the Designated Survivor.
The president.
It's on Netflix.
Yeah.
And I actually, in my government class, I missed this somewhere, but I didn't realize when they held the State of the Union that there was a Designated Survivor. And so the whole premise, not to give it away, is that Kiefer Sutherland is chosen as a Designated Survivor during the State of the Union.
Yeah. There's an attack. He's the only one who survives the attack, and he becomes the president because he is the Designated Survivor.
Yeah. Very interesting.
Yeah, I did have to learn that in government class because I had to watch the State of the Union one year and write down who the
who was missing
survivor.
Yeah,
like it was like
I didn't
Secretary
know that.
of the Interior.
It
or something.
makes total sense. And this guy was HUD,
Mm-hmm.
like Tom Kirkman. This character, he was HUD, so that's why he wasn't there. But can I just say one thing really quickly?
Of course.
Before we end this,
Please do.
Teachers right now are like, we're really struggling, and this has been a super emotional time. I'm getting a little choked up just talking right now. It's been hard. Like, this coronavirus stuff has been really difficult, and I've been talking to my coworkers and my friends, and like, we're all sort of struggling because this is the sweet spot of the school year. Like, this is what it's all about. Like, May, like it's prom, it's graduation, it's all of our things. But like March and April is like, it's my favorite time. So like, first of all, if any of my students listen, which I know some of them do, I hope you know that we all miss you and that we hope you're taking care of yourself. But also for like other teachers and for parents who are being teachers for the first times because they're home with their kids and they're struggling with devices and internet and everything else. Like we should all be on the same team. We should all be trying to do the best for, our kids. We should all be trying to take care of them. We're trying to provide meaningful learning so that the gap to next year is as small as possible. We're not trying to, and I say we because I see a lot of people I know posting about their frustrations, and I can only imagine how hard it would be with multiple kids at home to try to work and teach them all at the same time. But we're all like doing our best out here, and I think that's all we can ask. And so if you're a teacher, you should be teaching with the most kindness and compassion that you've ever had, and forgiveness.
Keep being the heroes that you are.
And if you're a parent, man, you're doing a great job. And we miss you, and we hope you're back soon. I want to see my kids again. I want to see my seniors before they go. So I hope we can all be healthy. I hope we all stay home where we belong right now.
Stay home and be healthy.
So,
is that it?
Thanks for listening.
It is not the fashion to see the lady, the epilogue, but it's no more unhandsome than to see the lord, the prologue. If it be true that good wine needs no bush, 'tis true that a good play needs no epilogue. Yet to good wine they do use good bushes, and good plays prove the better by the help of good epilogues. What a case am I in, then, that am neither a good epilogue nor cannot insinuate with you in behalf of a good play? I am not furnished like a beggar, therefore to beg will not become me. My way is to conjure you, and I'll begin with the women. I charge you, O women, for the love you bear to men, to like as much of this play as please you. And I charge you, O men, for the love you bear to women, as I perceive by your simpering, none of you hates them, that between you and the women the play may please. If I were a woman, I would kiss as many of you as had beards that pleased me, complexions that liked me, and breaths that I defied not. And I am sure as many as have good beards or good faces or sweet breaths will, for my kind offer, when I make curtsy, bid me farewell. Listeners, thanks for supporting 16 to 1.
We're trying to grow our audience, so please check us out at 16to1.com, all spelled out, and tell your friends about the show.
On our website, you can find links to follow us on social media, an archive of all our old episodes, and a contact form where you can get in touch.
Thanks again for listening, and we'll catch you next show. So I've officially reached that level of boredom in my quarantine